Hello and welcome to Ideas with Diana, episode 609 for the sixth season. Today is May 12th, 2023. On today's show, I'd like to talk about reparations. In California, there's a new law proposing that Black people receive $1.2 million for reparations for slavery. Um, Also, this was done in Evanston in a different way, for mostly for people in Ninth District of Evanston. Um, for those who haven't been to Evanston, it has become the nanny state on steroids. Just to give you an example, when I was down there in 2016, 2017, I stayed with a friend. His mother had recently died. He lived in a condo in Chicago Avenue, and he lived in a nice condo by Chicago. It was close to the Northwestern University, and I used to go for walks on the lake, stop at the Welcome Center Northwestern, pick up the Daily Northwestern to read, and walk to Chicago River, turn back, and come down on Chicago Avenue, and either take a breather at a Whole Foods on Chicago Avenue or down to Barnes and Noble, and there's a Barnes and Noble down there. But one day, what happened? A friend of mine, he asked me, he said, look, since you're going to Jewel, can you go and get me a pack of Camels? I said, sure. I said, I'll go down. I said, well, I said, wait, I better give you some money. I said, well, I can cover it. He said, no, let me give you some money. So he gave me a 20. He says, well, are you sure it's going to be that much? And I said, yeah. So what happens? He gave me, excuse me, he gave me like $25, and it's like I walked down and I was expecting, you see, in Wisconsin, a pack of Camels at that time was 5.50. So I was walking down. I said, well, I like a pack of Camels, and the clerk cleans it up and says, well, $22.30. I said, I just asked for one pack. Yeah, $22. I said, really? Yeah. And what happened was she sort of explained to me in code that it's the nanny state taxes for other things. And it's like, oh my God. And I got back. I said, and I told my friend, I said, how in the world can you afford to smoke down here every day? $22 a pack? God, I don't smoke, but it's like, really? And then what happens another time, Evanston was eliminating plastic bags from the groceries, so everyone had to use these dinky paper bags, which if you have to walk, like I lived about 4 blocks north of the jewel store, and then when you walk back with these stinky bags, especially if they had cans and stuff in the handles, they'd break, and it's like, and one time I said, well, we don't have price. I said, well, I said, since when? I said, you had it yesterday. Oh, at the Common Council meeting at 12 midnight, they changed the law that we can't have plastic. Really, at 12 midnight, almost like the midnight judges of John Adams, according to the old phrase. And I sort of was a little bit upset. I kept my composure, but I just said, really? They passed it at 12 midnight. So was there any public discussion? Then everyone looked at me, ooh. It's like I said something against the Central Democratic Party, who's acting more like the German Democratic Party of East Germany. It's like, oh, you should say that. You should. And the next day, when I went to take the train to go up to visit friends in Kenosha, I had the mayor of Evanston come up to me. It's like, well, you're the new person from Wisconsin. You don't quite understand how things go around here, do you? No. But according to my Professor Goldsberg, when I asked him about graduate school, about going to Northwestern, I asked him about, comparing Madison and Northwestern. And at that time, he told me Northwestern and Madison, and even Madison and Evanston were two peas in a pod. So I thought basically I would fit in well down here. I wouldn't run into the ooh, and she said, well, then she tried to hem and haw, and finally she said, well, you have a lot to learn and such, and she walked away. And other people on the train track as I was waiting said, oh, look at them, like, thank God someone can speak up, is not afraid to speak up with the council. It's like one older person from the Ninth District. She's not afraid to speak up for the council either, which I'm glad she does, because for people living in the Ninth District of Evanston, it is almost like uh, Hans Christian Andersen's story about a city divided by a wall, where one side of the city lived very well and the other side of the city lived very poor. But the king didn't realize about the poor side of the city until his spirit was able to visit the poor side of the city. And that's how the Ninth District is bars on the windows, buildings that are not kept up, a mall that hasn't been rebuilt since the 1960s, people with leaking roofs. And now, well, at least with the Save Riders, they can get some payment to fix their roofs and stuff. They still have to go through a lot of paperwork, and they still have to go through funding rules to get it. But it would have been better, I think, if Evanston would have just made it as a general policy for those that are below a certain income or something and can prove they're below a certain income, they get the money to fix the homes, and because it helps the whole community, rather than make it political. Some people think it is political. I mean, that's what they're. But going back now, getting to the California thing, California thing. I was watching different news things like Newsmax, News Nation, um, and also liberal channels. And I saw there's a public comment section in Oakland, and some people were saying, well, if you expect to get elected to office, unless you agree to reparations, you're not going to get elected to office and such and such. And other discussions I listened on multiple stations, multiple points of view, all shared a common thing, because one person said it best. He said, well, like Megan Kelly, she had a guest on there, and she asked him, well, what do you think of this California reparations thing? And what happened was basically is basically she asked the commentators, is a conservative commentator, but also moderate commentator, but he's willing to listen to all points of view and evaluate all points of view fairly. So well, here's what's going to happen. Well, due to this California reparation things, um, I am a poor black man, and that's what he said. And what happened with the implication is that anyone can game the system now, because basically so someone can say, well, I'm a poor black man because maybe they received a transfusion from someone who is black of a blood supply, going back to the 1950s rationale, or maybe or if they're biracial, they can say they can get it. And I talked with a friend of mine who we go for lunch, and we are close friends and stuff, and basically a lot of people think of us as a couple, and basically, but we live in separate apartments. But the thing is, I asked, I said, well, what do you think about this 1.2 million? And her thing was, why? How are people going to pay for this? And how are the working people and poor people going to pay for it? Because she had her own career. She has a master's in sociology and psychology from Marquette, and she's worked many different careers. She's worked as a machinist, a social worker, a store manager, and she's retired now. And she even and she says, "Who in the world thought this?" She says, "Were they drunk? Were they on drugs?" Uh, because she even realizes, someone has to pay for it. You can't keep taking from other people's money and hope that they did that. Because going back to linking this to Evanston, when I was in Evanston, I talked with some people, and I asked, I said, I remember Evanston in the 80s when I used to when they go down to Evanston, go down to Chicago, and going from Kenosha to Chicago Metro is $4 one way, and $2 to Evanston to go to Davis Street from Kenosha. And I said, it was so nice. It's nice to see someplace that didn't have graffiti, and that coexisted with everybody. I said, but now when I come down, I see graffiti, and even when I went into Barnes and Noble, there's like different police officers. They had this Kevlar vest. They had this 9mm military style Glock. They had this special helmet on as a greeter to the store. And one time I asked when a policeman, she was a policewoman, I asked, I said, well, no, based on where I'm staying with a friend, the homeowner association fees are quite high. And I said, I always assumed that Evanston was sort of a safe place. It is, but it says, well, we have to keep it we have to have a physical presence to keep the gangs from overrunning Barnes and Noble because basically they'll try to come in and lawyer and do other stuff. And I said, really, you have to put all that on? He said, yeah. I said, and what happens eventually, I saw what she meant because I went down to one other store and there was someone that's sleeping in front of the store on the stoop making off that until someone gave enough money, they weren't rested enough. Um, Again, the nanny state out of control on steroids. And so this reminds me of the reparations thing. Even successful African Americans and Black people don't don't like want to receive reparations because the reason why is simply this. Some of them consider receiving reparations as a form of still being under control of the old system. It's a way of saying, well, okay, give them so much money and they'll go away. Give them so much money and they'll go away. Um, and even when we consider reparations to other things, let's consider Fourth Reich Milwaukee at the time when, after the war, when many Nazis came to Milwaukee and they tried to smother the Polish American culture, because I'm Polish American on my father's side, and I'm German, Scotch, Irish, and Norman on my mother's side. So it makes me part Danish and part Viking. So what happened was they tried to smother and they say, well, Kaneki, that's a hard name to say, but yet their name was Fudenhofer. They could say Fudenhofer and spell, but they wouldn't even make an attempt to say Kaneki or even try to spell it. And I heard many mispronunciations. And even like when my parents were separated one time, when I visited my mother in downtown Milwaukee when she lived on Cass Street, this was before the Regency Mall, about in the mid 70s, early 70s to, well, 73 to 77 to 76. Um, what happened? I walked down there, and we go to Big Boy, which was out in Wisconsin at that time, and near between Gimbel's and Boston Store, and we have to walk past these disgusting knots. Bouncers handing out the literature, and they deliberately try to hand the literature to us because, as I found out years later when I did meet a Reform Nazi at one conference, luckily I'm glad for a friend of mine who was able to diplomatically disengage me from the conversation that he had tried to pigeonhole me into. But during that time, he said, "Well, you know, you're the perfect German. You have blonde hair, you have blue eyes, you're athletically thin." But yet the only thing is I could tell that basically you're half you're part Polish, but yet you were raised and conduct yourself German, and so many Nazis look at people different. Bad guys look at women as a piece of meat. She has nice breasts, a nice butt, nice stoop, nice legs, nice thighs. Nazis look at people as a piece of genetics. Oh, you have blonde hair, you have blue eyes, you're thin, you're such and such. Well, go in Milwaukee at that time, many Polish Americans. We didn't ask the city of Milwaukee for reparations. We didn't ask. The only thing we asked for with the federal government was basically equality, just fairness and select who gets selected for a job, who gets selected for a promotion, and also fair pay scale, not the Nazi Fourth Reich pay scale if you're quote Aryan enough or willing to collaborate with the Nazis as some Polish people did, which they're looked down upon in the culture, or the ones that kept the Polish name who have to take a lower pay scale passed over for promotion. And that's why many of us ended up like me working in California. I worked in San Francisco and I worked in La Jolla for many years before coming back to Milwaukee. And even now, I consider myself closer to Chicago than I do Milwaukee because Chicago, parts of Chicago and Western Milwaukee are more two peas in a pod than the actual east side of Milwaukee County or east side of Milwaukee, because that's where the culture. East side is still has some elements of the Fourth Reich Nazism. West side doesn't. But it's interesting. The west side, the western suburbs of Milwaukee are mostly Republican. East side are mostly Democrat. But some people would say almost like Democrat to be as like the GDR, German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, that type of Democrat. When you watch the movie Spy Who Came in from the Cold, and the liberal librarian who suddenly discovers that her GDR friends are not as nice as they make off to be when they're in England, and that though. So what happens is, my point about reparations is simply this: if we're going to start gaming politics and start thinking about, oh, we can take other people's money, and the rich can afford to do this, the rich, we can take more of this, we can take more of this, um again, it goes back to show Megyn Kelly had, where she had one person that at least she was an American citizen from North Korea, and she made a very starry comment, even that Megyn Kelly was surprised, and I was too, that the United States is becoming more and more like North Korea, even though some people don't realize it. Because in a Marxist system, what happens, like especially like in North Korea, everyone is made to tattle on everyone else. Well, what did this person do that we didn't see? What did that person do? So what happens when everyone tattles on everyone? There's no trust. There isn't any trust at all, because people say, "Oh, I better be careful what I say, so just in case if it goes out, I'm not called before the special committee." And that's how it is now with this wokeism. Because this wokeism, if you stay along things, canceled, canceled. There's no trial, there's no jury, there's no judge. It's just basically the first democracy. We're the first democracy. We don't need a judge. We don't need a trial. We don't need a court. You're canceled. You're canceled, and they can enforce it, or they can force the person to enforce on themselves. Even the Greeks realized the first democracy was a fallacy, and that was an attempt at wokeism with the death of Socrates. If you wish to read that, you'll see parallelisms to wokeisms today, and why the Greeks have eventually abandoned the first democracy and moved to what's called the second democracy, or liberal democracy, which is what we're trying to preserve, where basically one person cannot be judged during execution, one person cannot be judged in jury, one person cannot force someone through double jeopardy or multiple jeopardy. One person does not have the right to force someone to believe their political, sociological, lifestyle, or religious beliefs. They may practice it upon themselves, but they don't have a right to practice upon others in work, public spaces, um, captive spaces, schools, universities, such and such. I'm probably going to get a few university professors mad at me about that, but so what? But the thing is, with this reparation thing, um, does California really know what it's doing? And I don't mean the people. The people of California are very nice. I have friends. I have friends in California. Many from our lockers, and also have their own metal bands, and the business people. Um, and also many in technology. But I wonder, with the elites and some of the other people, who make these um, odd decisions. I wonder if the people really had a public statement in this, and how to say this, because when someone who's making minimum wage and just having a hard enough time to pay rent, somebody just goes, "What? I got to pay 10% more in taxes for this reparations. I can't afford it." Well, sorry, you don't fit the criteria. You're considered a cracker or a slave owner, folks. Even Gene Roddenberry, when the second TV series of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and the first episode, which was written by J.C. Fontana, DC, no, I'm sorry, DC Fontana, and Gene Roddenberry. DC Fontana, is a famous woman science fiction writer, but at the time she couldn't use her feminine first name, because basically women were highly discriminated in Hollywood, and even in the media. So, but when they wrote the episode talked about, well, um, according to the new the captain who were tried for crimes he made, and accused of, well, according to the United Nations Court, you are guilty of of past grievances or past murders and atrocities that your previous generation did. And Captain Picard responds, well, according to the UN Court of 2065, the current generation cannot be held accountable for what the past generation did or even what their forebears did. So that means like even people in Germany, the current people living in Germany, they cannot be held accountable for what the Nazis did. Even if one of their ancestors was a Nazi, they cannot be held accountable. And then Q says, well, this isn't the court of 2065. This is the post-apocalyptic court of 2051. And Picard went, oh my God. And then Q said, I'm going to give you an option. Are you guilty or not guilty? And I will not accept not guilty. So he says, I'll give you, and so it happens, they break to commercial. And my dad told me, he said, this is a very important point. Guess what his answer is going to be? Because he's only allowed to answer yes. So what happens is basically, and my dad knew exactly what the answer was. He didn't see the episode, but he knew because of his management and executive experience. And said, so I listened. And I said, and Picard says, okay, I'll play by your rules, accepting you as judge, jury, and executioner. We are guilty conditionally. Then Q, realizing that he caught himself in his own trap, he says, okay, I will hear your conditions. Now, after the conditions were given, then Q realized that the captain and his crew were recognized the history and also were not slaves to it. So basically, rather than pay reparations, they made changes to make sure that other generations do not have to go through what previous generations went through. And that's what should be done. Not the reparations that's like, oh, give them so much money and they'll go away. No, that doesn't solve anything. You really want to prove what happened in the past? Make sure there's equal equality in job selection. Make sure there's equal equality in promotion. Make sure there's equal equality in pay scale. That does not like in Fourth Reich Milwaukee, the Fourth Reich Milwaukee pay scale where you get the higher pay scale, and if you still decide to remain Polish, you get the lower pay scale. And even to this day, although Fourth Reich Milwaukee diminished greatly in 1999, my family doctor is a naturalized American doctor from Poland. My cardiologist is a naturalized American doctor, literally. She's originally from St. Petersburg. My endocrinologist is a Polish American doctor born in the United States. So as you can see, I still maintain my strong ethnic ties, and all three of my doctors are glad that we can, because basically there's so much pressure in Milwaukee to be homogenized into this Fourth Reich German. Yeah, Milwaukee. No, sorry. Milwaukee is not a Berlin. Is not Fourth Reich Berlin. Milwaukee is an American city. And what happens, we reserve the right to watch the Cubs and support the Cubs as well as the Brewers, because actually I support both teams, but I actually watch the Cubs more because I living in Kenosha, I used to listen to a Cubs game when Jack Brickhouse was announcing the Cubs played at 1:30 in the afternoon from Wrigley Field and then play under the lights. So this is my 2 cents. Let me know what you think. We're on Telegram, Twitter, and Truth Social. So on Telegram, Diana1A, on Twitter, Diana1A, and on Truth Social, Leo Diana1A and Diana1A. So let me know what you think. And this has been Ideas with Diana, episode 609.